what happens when faith, instead of grounding you, becomes the very thing that pulls you into darkness. For Andre Thomas, religion wasn't just a belief, it was a lifeline in a world filled with chaos and despair, battling voices in his head and haunted by visions he couldn't escape. He clung to the Bible, searching desperately for answers. But as his dependency on scripture deepened, it became harder to separate reality from delusion. His fixation on the book of Revelation and apocalyptic warnings turned his faith into an obsession, fueling a mental spiral that led to unimaginable tragedy. This is the story of a man whose fractured mind turned faith into destruction. Hey y'all, I'm BlaqueWitchYaya. Thank you so much for tuning into this video, and trigger warning across the board. For every trigger that needs a warning, it's in this video. If you're eating and you have a weak stomach, I'll see you later. If you're doing your hair and you're trying to get your middle part straight, I'll see you later. If you're having a good day and you're very sensitive to energy, I'll see you later. But if you are into strange cases like me, let's get started. March 17th, 1983, Andre Thomas was born to parents Rochelle and Danny Thomas in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and raised for a majority of his life in Sherman, Texas. There are different perspectives when it comes to Andre's childhood. According to his mom, he was a good kid and faced some obstacles due to his father Danny being absent, and according to Andre's father, he states that he was very present and the obstacles that Andre faced was due to his mother Rochelle being abusive. Rochelle, the mom, was strict and did use violence as a way of punishment, and the father thinks it's because of how Rochelle was raised is the reason why she raised Andre and his siblings the way she did. Rochelle faced sexual abuse growing up, struggled with alcoholism, and as an adult, which was a common problem in the family, a lot of family members were heavy drinkers. Rochelle depended on alcohol to face life troubles, one being the home she was raising Andre and his siblings in. It would often go without electricity, water, and heat. The family grew up in poverty, and it didn't help that all the responsibility was on the mother Rochelle. Even though the father claimed like he was present, Rochelle and Danny got a divorce when Andre was just 3, and he didn't really show face after that, so I'm not sure how he says he was present, but you're not going to hear anything else about him throughout the rest of the story. But despite his living environment as a child, Andre had a few unique skills, one being construction. And I'm not talking about, oh, he knows how to make beautiful designs with a block set. He would take apart things in the house and be able to assemble it back together, like appliances, the house phone, and even taking apart parts of a car and being able to put it back together. He was very skilled, very knowledgeable. He was very smart too and filled with energy. According to his Sunday school teacher at church, she stated he will always actively listen, take notes, and being able to answer questions before she even finished asking the question. He was really into the Bible and learning new stories in each book. The interest in religion made him discover some gifts that he had himself, one being he will always hear voices in his head, and he felt like the voices were a mix of angels and demons. These voices would soon get louder to the point he couldn't take it anymore. He wanted to silence the voices, he just wanted peace in his mind. He wanted this peace so bad that he attempted suicide twice, and from there, now, just like his mother, he now depends on alcohol and weed to stop the voices. That seemed to help, so he managed the voices and was just able to escape his mind by smoking and drinking. 9th grade, Andre met his school sweetheart Laura, who became pregnant by Andre. They gave birth to a son named Andre Jr., and they nicknamed him Juicy, so I'll call the son Juicy throughout the story. Andre and Laura got married March 17, 2001. It seems like as soon as they tied the knot, the relationship went left and they divorced only 4 months after. Laura took Juicy with her to be raised by her and her family, and this left Andre devastated. The voices he once suppressed with alcohol and weed were now louder than ever, and he went from just hearing the voices to now hallucinating. He's seeing things, having suicidal thoughts, and having breakdowns and psychotic episodes. He would constantly go to the Bible for answers, and this would turn his passion for religion into now an obsession. Laura noticed a decline in his mental health and made the decision to limit the visitation between Juicy and Andre for her protection, and this decision seemed to make Andre's mental state even worse because he didn't have as much access to her and his child, and the access to Laura became even more limited when Laura entered a new relationship and had another kid. He now lived alone and his mental health is declining. It was hard for him to keep a job, which made it hard for him to pay his bills, leading to his electricity and water being turned off. Over time, adult Andre began to live the same life as adolescent Andre. Continuing to try to find answers to his many questions in the Bible, Andre became fixated on the book of Revelation. Andre reportedly taped his mouth shut during one of his psychotic episodes because he believed he needed to prevent himself from speaking evil or releasing spirits. This act was rooted in his delusional interpretation of biblical scripture, specifically passages from the book of Revelation, which speaks about the power of words, judgment, and the consequences in sin. There are 3 scriptures that might have added on to this need to duct tape his mouth. One of the scriptures being Revelation chapter 13 verses 5 and 6.
The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and to exercise its authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God, and to slander his name, and his dwelling place, and those who live in heaven.
Andre might have identified with this scripture, believing he needed to silence himself to avoid blasphemy or evil speech. Another verse that may have motivated his action is Revelation chapter 22 verse 15.
Outside are the dogs, those who practice magic arts, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood.
He may have seen himself as unworthy or feared his words could align him with sin. And another chapter and verse that may have motivated this is Revelation chapter 19 verse 15.
Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter.
This verse symbolically associates the mouth with destruction and divine power, which could have reinforced his fear of saying something harmful or destructive. Now, while flipping through the book of Revelation, Andre also came to the conclusion that the secret to life is printed on the $1 bill. This likely stemmed from a misinterpretation of Revelation chapter 13, verse 16 through 18, which references the mark of the beast and numbers associated with commerce and control. While this specific verse does not mention money directly, individuals with religious delusions or an interest in conspiracy theories often link its symbolism found on currency, particularly on the US dollar. Revelation 13, verse 16 through 18 says,
It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666.
Now, the actions of Andre went beyond pondering and flipping through the Bible. In 2002, Andre was charged for assault and admitted to the authorities that he drinks 2 40-ounce beers a day. In 2003, Andre was arrested for stabbing his brother over an altercation about music. Andre was playing music way too loud for his brother's comfort, and his brother claimed that the music he was playing was sending evil spirits through the wall. And this indicates that it wasn't just Andre who had mental health concerns in the family, and it may be something that runs throughout the family. In 2004, a friend of Andre's decided enough was enough and took him to a mental health clinic where Andre shared with the staff that life was beginning to be a bit too much and he wanted to leave Earth. The staff immediately started the process to obtain emergency detention warrants. An emergency detention order was signed by a judge but was never enforced, so Andre just left the mental health clinic. Then did the same thing again 2 weeks later when his mother took him to the Texoma Medical Center in Denison, Texas. He arrived at the emergency room after taking 10 quercetin pills with vodka and stabbing himself in the chest. He expressed to the medical staff that he was trying to cross over into heaven. The medical staff noted his psychotic state and began arranging for psychotic commitment. A doctor who concluded Andre Thomas was paranoid, hallucinating, and suicidal but Andre was left unattended, and during this time where he was left alone, he just left and went home. Another emergency detention order was issued. The police were informed, but the order was never carried out. And you may be thinking, why in the world do the staff keep just letting him be or just leaving him alone, just letting him leave when he's obviously mentally unstable? In Texas, the requirements for keeping mental health patients in a clinic or hospital are regulated by laws that aim to balance the rights of individuals with the need for public safety and appropriate care. However, there are scenarios where individuals with severe mental health issues may not be required to remain in treatment, often due to legal, systemic, or administrative reasons. And they say that Texas is working on having more stricter and greater care to mental health patients, because this isn't the first time where they just let somebody go and they caused harm to someone else. March 26, 2004, Andre went to the mother of his child, Laura's, and her boyfriend's home to discuss their relationship. It's been rocky for a while, so he wanted to discuss how they can make it better for the co-parenting of their son. During this visit, Andre, Laura, and Brian all sat down to listen to religious audio tapes. While listening, Andre noticed that Bryant was twisting an extension cord as they listened to the religious tapes, and he's watching him fidget with the extension cord, and he's thinking, wow, he must be thinking the same thing. He wants to kill everyone too. He must be thinking about strangling Laura with the extension cord. He was tempted to go to the kitchen to get knives to act out the plan, but he didn't feel like it was the right time. After their listening session, Bryant drove Andre home, which I'm guessing they had some type of mutual relationship, or he knew Andre wasn't all the way together, so Bryant showed some grace towards him. Where did this urge to kill his wife's daughter, and his son come from? Of course, the Almighty God. Andre heard God tell him to kill his wife Laura because she was Jezebel, to kill his 4-year-old son Andre Jr., Juicy, because he was the Antichrist, and to kill his wife's daughter, 1-year-old daughter Leah, because she too was evil. And I'm referring to Laura as Andre's wife because I believe they were still married through this process. March 27, 2004, Andre heard God tell him again to kill them, but use 3 different knives so you don't cross-contaminate their blood and let the demons in them leave through the stab wound. Andre made his way to Laura's apartment. On his way there, he saw Laura's boyfriend Brian driving to work. Brian greeted him with a slight head nod and continued on to work. What would seem like a cordial greeting amongst people, even a stranger, you just give them a head nod to address their presence. Andre took that as a sign that Brian is giving him permission to kill his family. Now, Brian gave him a head nod, but he was thinking it's odd that he's going over to see Laura randomly. So he called Laura's dad to tell him and to head over there to make sure she's okay. Now, while Brian is making the phone call, Andre is forcing himself into the home. Then he stabbed and killed 20-year-old Laura, 4-year-old Juicy, and Laura's and Brian's daughter, 1-year-old Leah. He used a different knife on each victim, and then he carved out the children's heart and stuffed them into his pockets. For Laura, he carved out her heart as well, mistakenly cutting out a piece of her lung, but he still put all of the hearts and the piece of lung into his pocket. He then stabbed himself in the heart, which he thought would assure the death of the demons that had inhibited his wife and the children. After stabbing himself, he walked home, changed his clothes, and put the hearts into a paper bag and threw them into the trash. He walked to his father's house with the intention of calling Laura, whom he just killed, but instead he called Laura's parents and left a message on their answering machine. Sherry, this is Andre. I need y'all's help. Something bad is happening to me, and it keeps happening. I don't know what's going on. I need some help. I think I'm in hell. I need help. Somebody needs to come and help me. I need help bad. I'm desperate. I'm afraid to go to sleep. So when you get this message, come by the house, please. Hello? Andre then walked back to his trailer where his girlfriend Carmen Hayes and his cousin Isaiah Gibbs were waiting for him. He told them that he had just killed his wife and the 2 children. Carmen took him to the Sherman Police Department, and he told the police what he had done. After he was hospitalized for his chest wound, he was taken to jail, and he gave a videotaped statement to the police. In that videotaped statement, Andre gives a very calm, complete, and coherent account of his activities and his reason for them. Now, Laura's father is on the way to his daughter's home. walks into a crime scene, and he immediately calls 911. Let's get the perspective of the officers who received the call and arrived at the crime scene. These are different snippets from the incident reports. I'll have the full report linked down below if you want to read through it. So the first snippet is from the incident report from Sergeant Mullins.
On March 7th, 2004, at approximately 0722 hours, I was in the briefing room conducting the 0700 briefing. At approximately 0722 hours, the briefing room phone rang and I answered it. Dispatcher Marinda Womack advised me that she had just received a call of a possible triple homicide. Womack stated that the homicide occurred at the Arrowwood Apartments, 1200 West Taylor Apartment, 340. I turned to Officer Dawsey and Officer Miller and told them to start towards Arrowwood Apartments, Code 3. I then told the other officers to respond also. Dispatcher Womack told me that Paul Boren had gone to that location and found his daughter, Laura, and 2 grandchildren stabbed. Boren told Dispatcher Womack he believed all 3 were dead because they were blue. I pulled into the parking area in front of Building 10. Officer Dawsey arrived shortly after I did. I approached the apartment up the stairs. As I was moving up the stairs, I noticed that the door jamb was broken and that the door was standing open. I drew my department-issued handgun and stopped at the top of the stairs to allow Officer Dawsey to catch up. I then told him that we were going to conduct a protective sweep of the residence to see if any victims or suspects were inside. When I got to the threshold of the door, I shouted in a loud, clear voice, "Sherman Police Department." I then moved into the living room of the apartment and immediately noticed a white female lying on the ground. The white female had a large, gaping chest wound and blood on her upper torso. The white female was pale and appeared dead. As I visually cleared the room, I moved past the deceased female and looked into the kitchen. I then shouted again, "Sherman Police Department," and stepped past the deceased female to move down the hall. In the 2 bedrooms that were down the hall, I did not observe any suspects. In the bedroom that was on the northeast corner of the apartment, I observed 2 small children with knife wounds to the chest. One of the children, who appeared to be approximately 4, was lying in a toddler bed against the north wall. There was a large open wound in the child's chest and blood on the wall. A toddler was lying on the floor with a large wound in her chest. There was a large amount of blood in the crib, and it appeared that the suspect had began the assault in the crib and then removed the child and placed her on the floor. Both children were pale and appeared deceased. I then moved back down the hallway to where Officer Dawsey was. I told Officer Dawsey what I had seen and told him to move back out of the apartment. We then moved out of the apartment. As I was leaving the apartment, Officer Ferguson and Officer Guideo were arriving. I told them to start putting up crime scene tape and protecting the area. During my protective sweep of the apartment and the second time I entered with paramedics, I noticed that the kitchen light was on. The living room light was not. In the hallway, there was no light on, and in the parents' bedroom, no light was on. In the children's room, the light was on, and a small 13-inch TV was playing cartoons. The window to the children's room appeared to be slightly open. I observed blood in the crib and blood on the north wall.
Incident report from Officer Malden.
I was contacted at home by dispatch and was advised that there had been a triple homicide and that they needed me to come to the station to work. I arrived to the back door of the Sherman Police Department at 0936 hours and stepped into the hallway. As I stepped into the hallway, Dispatcher Marinda Womack stepped out of dispatch into the hall and stated the suspect Andre Thomas is in the lobby. I proceeded to the lobby of the Sherman Police Department where I observed black male subject I later identified as Andre Thomas on the dispatch phone. I took Mr. Thomas off the phone, placed him on the south wall of the lobby, and frisked the subject for weapons. As I was frisking the subject for weapons, the suspect made the comment, "Will I be forgiven?" I advised Andre Thomas that I knew nothing about the case that I had just arrived at the station. At that point, Detective Bryce Smith, number 1.1.5, entered the lobby and approached suspect Thomas and handcuffed him behind his back. I later double-locked the handcuffs. At that point, Thomas advised Detective Smith 115 that he was hurt. Thomas showed Detective Smith injuries to his chest that he stated CU were stab wounds. At that point, Detective Smith 115 requested Dispatch 0 send an ambulance to the back of the Sherman Police Department. I then escorted suspect Andre Thomas to the book-in room and handcuffed him to the bench. Shortly after that, paramedics arrived and began to attend to suspect Thomas. At that point, I unhandcuffed Thomas and removed his shirt. I then turned to Detective Bryce Smith, number 11.5, and requested approximately paper bag to place the shirt in. Detective Smith returned with several paper bags, and I placed the shirt into one of the bags and handed it to Detective Smith, number 11.5, and advised him that if I was going to keep up with the suspect, he would need to take charge of that bag of evidence. Sherman paramedics attended to Thomas and placed a bandage on his chest. Subsequent to that, it was decided by paramedics that the suspect needed to be transported to the hospital. At that time, the suspect was placed in the ambulance behind the PO1 stepped, and paramedics attended to him for several minutes while I waiting outside the back door of the ambulance. Once the paramedics advised that they were ready to transport the suspect, I rode in the back of the ambulance to the hospital with the suspect.
Just 5 days after the crime, while awaiting trial for the gruesome murders of his estranged wife, son, and stepdaughter, Andre Thomas, still reading his Bible, came across Matthew chapter 5, verse 29, which states,
If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell.
Being motivated by this verse, Andre plucked out his right eye while in jail. He later explained that he believed that this act was necessary to prevent himself from sinning and to atone for his perceived spiritual fallings. Psychiatrists who evaluated Andre Thomas concluded that this was a direct manifestation of his severe paranoid schizophrenia and untreated psychosis. These acts were seen as extreme symptoms of mental illness rooted in a combination of religious delusions and overwhelming paranoia. Between June 23, 2004 and August 2004, Andre Thomas was committed to North Texas State Hospital for psychiatric treatment after being declared incompetent to stand trial. During his 47-day hospitalization, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and received treatment aimed at stabilizing his mental state. This treatment primarily involved the administration of antipsychotic medications designed to alleviate symptoms of psychosis such as hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. Regular psychiatric evaluations were conducted to monitor his progress and determine whether his mental condition had improved sufficiently to meet the legal criteria for trial competency. The goal of the treatment was to restore his capacity to understand the charges against him and assist in his defense, ensuring that he could participate meaningfully in the legal process. By the end of his hospitalization, psychiatrists reported that his psychosis had been stabilized, and the court subsequently ruled him competent to stand trial. And on February 15, 2004, his trial began. The state of Texas versus Andre Thomas. This trial took place in Grayson County, Texas, and became one of the most controversial cases in recent history. Charged with capital murder for the gruesome killings of his estranged wife, Laura Boren, their 4-year-old son, Andre Jr., and 1-year-old daughter, Leah. The prosecution portrayed the murders as deliberate and premeditated, emphasizing the use of 3 separate knives and the removal of the victim's heart. Despite his severe mental illness, including a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia and a history of psychosis, the prosecution argued that Thomas understood the consequences of his actions and claimed his symptoms were exaggerated or drug or alcohol induced. The defense entered an insanity plea, highlighting his delusional belief that the victims were possessed by demons and pointing to his long history of untreated mental health struggles. However, the trial faced significant scrutiny for racial bias as the jury was composed entirely of white jurors, several of whom expressed opposition to interracial relationships, a critical element in the case given that Andre was black and Laura was white. During jury selection, potential jurors were asked about their views on interracial marriage, with some openly stating they did not agree with it, believed it was against their religious belief, and considered it morally wrong. Despite objections from the defense, the jurors were allowed to remain, raising questions about the fairness and impracticality of the trial. On March 11, 2005, the jury found Thomas guilty and sentenced him to death, rejecting the insanity defense despite his ongoing psychosis. This verdict sparked widespread controversy, with mental health advocates arguing that his condition should have rendered him ineligible for the death penalty, and legal experts condemning the trial as tainted by racial prejudice. The case remains a focal point for debates about mental health in the criminal justice system, the ethics of executing severely mentally ill individuals, and the persistent role of racial bias in legal proceedings. Throughout the trial, there were notable conflicts between the defense and prosecution teams. The defense criticized the prosecution for downplaying Thomas' mental health issues, while the prosecution accused the defense of exaggerating his condition to avoid a death sentence. Now, during this time, while staying 23 hours a day in a 6x10 jail cell on death row, Andre's mental state got worse, leading him to take his self-mutilation even further, this time plucking out his remaining eye and consuming it. Andre claimed that by eating his eye, he could prevent the government from seeing into his soul. After Andres Thomas' conviction, Catherine Carroll argued before the Fifth Circuit that his trial counsel was ineffective for failing to challenge jurors biased against interracial marriage, a critical issue given Thomas' case. In April 2021, the court upheld a verdict rejecting claims of ineffective counsel and racial bias. Carroll then petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court, but in October 2022, the court declined to hear the appeal. There were several justices that disagreed, but despite them disagreeing, the majority decision not to hear the case left the Fifth Circuit's ruling intact, meaning Thomas remains on death row, now with limited options for further appeals. As of December 2024, Andre remains alive on death row in Texas. His execution, initially scheduled for April 5th, 2023, was postponed to allow his legal team to prepare a case, proving that he is too incompetent to be executed. The case remains under legal review with no new execution date set at this time. So that is the story of Andre Thomas. Just some takeaways. Spirituality and religion can be incredibly powerful tools for personal growth, purpose, and connection because we are free thinkers within spirituality. You're told to trust yourself, trust your gut, trust the voices of your spirit guides, your ancestors. But when someone becomes too consumed or ungrounded in their spiritual beliefs, it can sometimes lead to what's called spiritual psychosis or spiritual bypassing. This happens when a person's devotion becomes so intense that they lose touch with reality. So what happens in spiritual psychosis? When someone becomes overly fixated on spiritual ideas, they start interpreting everything in their life as a sign. Like, oh, it was meant to be. I got a sign, because it feeds into whatever decision they initially wanted to make. They think everything is from the divine. It's a message. They just get too consumed with it. I often see this with people who are always getting readings and listening to readings and be like, oh no, they still love me. Oh no, this is a sign. My reader said this, my reader said that. You still have to have reality and common sense in order to operate and have a balance. Sometimes they'll develop rigid beliefs that they are chosen for a higher purpose above everybody else, so they isolate themselves from others. They experience extreme anxiety or paranoia, thinking that they are under spiritual attack or being watched by unseen forces, taking religious texts or teachings too literal and act on them in ways that might cause harm to themselves or others. And being in this state can feel very real and profound to the person experiencing it, but it's also dangerous because it disconnects them from the practical aspects of life, like relationships, work, or taking care of their mental health. While balance is important, spiritual growth should enhance your life, not take over it. The key is to stay grounded, check in with reality, make sure your spiritual practices are improving your day-to-day life rather than making it harder to function. Seek balance. Spiritual enlightenment is beautiful, but it should coexist with logic and reason as well, and have a connection to the real world. Watching for warning signs. If spirituality becomes obsessive or makes you feel more fear than peace or relax, it's time to reflect or seek guidance. Remember, spirituality is about finding meaning and connection, not losing touch with yourself or the world around you. Having both spiritual insight and a clear grip on reality creates a healthier, more fulfilling path to personal growth. So you guys, let me know what you think about this case down below. Let me know if you have ever met someone that's in spiritual psychosis or too involved in spirituality. Was that you before? And you kind of had to slap yourself back into reality? Let's have a conversation down below. And like I always say, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul. Until next time, you guys, Ashe, baby.